Random House Audio presents Profiles in Leadership, Historians on the Elusive Quality of Greatness. Edited by Walter Isaacson. This is Nicholas Hormann. The Society of American Historians, SAH, was founded in 1939 by Allen Nevins and several fellow historians for the purpose of promoting literary distinction in the writing of history and biography. Since 1957, when the SAH inaugurated the annual Francis Parkman Prize for the best written American history, the Society's chief activity has been to identify and celebrate distinguished historical writing. In 1961, the Society established the annual Allen Nevins Prize for the publication of the best written dissertation in American history. And in 1993, the biennial James Fenimore Cooper Prize for American Historical Fiction. In 2008, the Society joined with the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute to inaugurate the annual Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr. Award for distinguished writing of enduring public significance. Introduction. Walter Isaacson. There is no one recipe for great leadership. Sometimes the men and women who emerge as leaders are the ones who are the most firmly wedded to their vision and principles. At other times, it is the more flexible and practical who thrive. Even traits that might seem to be obvious assets to leadership are sometimes not as important as we assume. Take, for example, intelligence. Often the connection between it and successful leadership seems shaky at best. There are even times when it seems like an inverse correlation. Our most influential presidents, George Washington, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, were not necessarily our smartest ones, but rather the wisest at the tricky art of balancing pragmatism and principle. That is one reason why crucial moments often call for a mix of leadership skills. That was true of America's birth. Each of America's founders displayed different, yet complementary traits. George Washington possessed unassailable rectitude and stature. John Adams and his cousin Samuel showed great passion and fealty to principle. Thomas Jefferson and his protege James Madison displayed elegant creative intelligence. Benjamin Franklin was inventive and pragmatic to the core, and had a wry wit that warmed rather than wounded those around him. But most important in those tumultuous years, Franklin was sage enough to bring passionate people together to lead them by listening to them. Likewise, the history of a nation is probably best served by a mix of leadership styles over the years, sometimes creating a pattern of reactions and then counter-reactions to what went before. There seems to be something charmed about America's political cycles that, along with an element of luck, serves up the people who are the right antidote or complement to the leaders who preceded them. The devious and darkly suspicious style of Richard Nixon, aided by the manipulative genius of Henry Kissinger, was suited to creating a triangular balance of power and détente with China and Russia. But Nixon's devious excesses at home and amoral realism abroad were countered by the fortuitous emergence of Gerald Ford and the election of Jimmy Carter, each of whom had a more solid moral grounding. One of the themes of the essays in this book is that the greatest challenge of leadership is to know when to be flexible and pragmatic on the one hand, and when it is, instead, a moment to stand firm on principle and clarity of vision. Even the best leaders get this wrong sometimes. I learned this when writing a biography of Franklin. His instinct was to try to balance the conflicting values that were at issue during moments of tough debate and to find common ground. At the Constitutional Convention, he was, at 81, the elder statesman. During that hot summer of 1787, the rivalry between the big and little states almost tore the convention apart over whether the legislative branch should be proportioned by population or with equal votes per state. Finally, Franklin rose to make a motion on behalf of a compromise that would have a House proportioned by population and a Senate with equal votes per state. When a broad table is to be made and the edges of planks do not fit, the artist takes a little from both and makes a good joint. he said. In like manner here, both sides must part with some of their demands. His point was crucial for understanding the art of true political leadership. Compromisers may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies. The toughest part of political leadership is knowing when to compromise versus when it is necessary to stand firm on principle. There is no easy formula for figuring that out, and Franklin got it wrong at times. At the Constitutional Convention, he went along with a compromise that soon haunted him, permitting the continuation of slavery. But he was wise enough to try to rectify such mistakes. After the convention, he became the president of a society for the abolition of slavery. He realized that humility required tolerance for other people's values, which at times required compromise of one's own. However, it was important to be uncompromising in opposing those who refused to show tolerance for others. We usually admire, as Franklin noted, the leaders who stand firm on principle more than those who compromise. But as Alan Brinkley shows in his essay in this collection, Herbert Hoover's unshakable principles repeatedly shackled him as he tried to deal with the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt, on the other hand, was flexible, pragmatic, and willing to try all sorts of experiments, whether or not they seemed consistent with a set of principles. He had also learned, perhaps from trying to hide his polio, how to mislead, manipulate, and conceal his actions and purposes. But those traits, along with its incredible ability to project empathy, formed the right mix for the country at that time. Wendell Willkie is an interesting and overlooked case of a leader who was both principled and willing to seek common ground with his political opponents. As David Levering Lewis explains in his essay, when Willkie won the 1940 nomination of the Republican Party, his best political strategy would have been to embrace the prevailing isolationist Republican sentiment and oppose any intervention in what was to become World War II. But Willkie followed his own principles and supported a consensus approach on foreign policy. After his loss, Willkie helped devise, with great clarity of vision, a Republican internationalism. Eisenhower was also good at eliciting consensus, as David Kennedy points out in his essay. When given a clear mission, he was able to bring people along and nurture a practical optimism. He did this not by being assertive. He never bought the notion that bullying and leadership were synonymous, but he was bold in his conduct of war because he was given a clear goal. Eisenhower was less effective, however, when he had to develop his own sense of mission and his own moral vision. That is why, Kennedy argues, he was timid on the race issue. He also valued comity over disruptive crusades for social justice. Added to that, I think, was that Eisenhower, like many people in the 50s, did not believe integration was something that should be rushed. A similar calibration is described in the essay by Elliott West on the Native American leader Chief Joseph. He tried hard to balance the determination that comes from acting on principle with the diplomacy and adaptive skill that come from being realistic and pragmatic. As he guided his tribe through war and defeat and subjugation, Chief Joseph needed all these wiles and traits. He also realized that conveying an image of nobility and grandeur, as George Washington naturally did, was an important aspect of being a leader. After he lost on the battlefield, he won respect for himself and his people by showing himself as a man of integrity and as the ideal of the noble savage. There are, of course, many other themes and lessons in the following essays. Kevin Baker explores, in his piece on the great baseball manager John Joseph McGraw, how inner demons can fuel the drive that is sometimes necessary, sometimes problematic in a forceful leader. Evan Thomas, in his evocative essay on Robert Kennedy, likewise shows how fears and insecurities can be channeled into such leadership qualities as an impatient drive and empathy with the downtrodden. Glenda Gilmore's riveting account of the inspiring struggles of Pauli Murray also struck me because I knew so little about her. The essay, I hope,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?